The wives of Hitler's inner circle were engineered to be propaganda flagships. Magda Goebbels was the first woman ever awarded the Mother's Cross of Honor. Gerda Bormann had 10 children. Lina Heydrich joined the Nazi Party 2 years before her own husband did. Anneliese Ribbentrop was nicknamed by Hitler himself Die Eiserne, the Iron One, the wife who wore the trousers. They were fanatical, fertile, photogenic, and loud. But the one woman who actually shared Hitler's bed for 16 years did not fit a single one of those rules. Eva Braun never joined the Nazi Party. She never bore a child. She was photographed in public with Hitler exactly once, and she spent her afternoons shopping Ferragamo in Florence and watching Gone with the Wind, a film ordinary Germans weren't allowed to see. The propaganda model of the Nazi wife was the exact opposite of the woman the Führer actually wanted in private, and that contradiction sits at the very core of the Third Reich's hypocrisy about womanhood. To understand how strange Eva Braun really was, you first have to understand what a Nazi wife was supposed to be, and the regime was very specific about it. The propaganda model had a shape, and it was drilled into millions of German women from 1933 onward. Be fanatical. Be fertile. Be visible. Obey. The NS Frauenschaft, the party's women's league, preached austere Aryan motherhood through speeches, pamphlets, and newsreels. The ideal German woman carried children, not opinions. She wore simple dresses, not silk stockings. She worked the land or raised the next generation. She did not sunbathe, she did not dance to jazz, and she certainly did not shop abroad. At the very top of this pyramid sat the wives of Hitler's inner circle, and they weren't decorative. They were load-bearing. Magda Goebbels appeared on the cover of NS Frauenwarte, the regime's flagship women's magazine, posed like a Madonna with her 6 children in matching white clothes. Gerda Bormann, married to Hitler's chief of staff, bore 10 children as living proof of the Aryan birth rate the Führer demanded from every German family. Emmy Goering hosted state receptions at Karenhall, the looted palace her husband had filled with stolen art. Henriette von Schirach operated as the consort of Vienna's Gauleiter. Anneliese Ribbentrop ran the diplomatic calendar of the foreign minister's household with such ferocity that Hitler himself half-joked she was the one who really ran the foreign ministry. These women weren't passive background, they were propaganda infrastructure. Their faces, their pregnancies, their dinner parties, all of it was engineered to tell ordinary German women what their own lives should look like. So once you know the canvas, every brushstroke of Eva Braun's private existence starts to look wrong. Because the Führer's own woman broke every single rule on the poster. The first rule she broke was the one nobody would ever expect her to break. Lina Heydrich joined the NSDAP in 1929. Her husband Reinhard, the future architect of the Holocaust, didn't join until 1931. She was 2 full years ahead of him. Anneliese Ribbentrop signed her membership card in December 1932, months before Hitler even took power. Magda Goebbels, Ilse Hess, Gerda Bormann. All of them were committed members, some before their husbands, some alongside. The party card was the entry ticket. Without it, you simply weren't a Nazi wife in any meaningful sense. Eva Braun never had one. For 16 years, the woman who shared Adolf Hitler's private rooms at the Berghof, who slept in the bedroom next to his, who appeared in hundreds of private films and photographs taken inside his mountain retreat, never once signed her name to a Nazi party membership book. Not in 1932, when she became his lover. Not in 1935, when she moved into his household. Not in 1939, when the war started. Not ever. This isn't a small detail. It's the first crack in the official image of what a Nazi wife was. Every other woman at the top of the regime had built her identity around party loyalty. Visible, documented, permanent. Eva didn't even bother with the paperwork. And Hitler never asked her to. Why? Because she wasn't being groomed for a public role. She was being kept for a private one. And, as you're about to see, the private one contradicted the public one in almost every possible way. If you're into the history that sits underneath the official story, the parts nobody prints on the posters, hit subscribe, because we pull threads like this every week. While the ideological wives were staged as propaganda assets, Eva Braun was engineered into near-total invisibility. Think about how strange that is. Magda Goebbels was a household face. Her photograph was on newsstands across Germany. Emmy Goering's weddings and birthdays were national events. When Edda Goering was born, her father Hermann ordered 500 aircraft to fly over Berlin in tribute. When Annelies Ribbentrop hosted a diplomatic dinner, the newsreels covered it. Eva Braun appeared in exactly one published newspaper photograph near Hitler, at the 1936 Winter Olympics in Garmisch-Partenkirchen. And even then, most Germans didn't know who she was. The Reichspresskorps had standing orders not to name her, not to caption her, not to draw attention to her. Her face was scrubbed from the public record as aggressively as Magda's was promoted into it. Albert Speer, who saw her constantly at the Berghof, left one of the starkest descriptions we have. He said she was banished from the table the moment any cabinet minister or high-ranking official arrived. She would eat in another room, or simply disappear for the evening, summoned back only when the guests had gone. She was, in Speer's later words, the loneliest woman he had ever known. Most Germans only learned Eva Braun existed after Hitler was already dead. In a regime that obsessed over every detail of its leaders' public lives, that was not an accident. That was a choice. The Führer, who demanded total visibility from every German, kept his own woman entirely hidden for 16 years. But while she was invisible in public, she was living a life no other Nazi wife was permitted to live. This is where the contradiction stops being abstract and becomes something you can almost touch. Eva Braun's wardrobe at the Berghof ran to Ferragamo shoes ordered direct from Florence. Her lingerie was monogrammed with the initials EB. She changed outfits up to 7 times a day, according to the staff who served her. She chain-smoked, forbidden in Hitler's presence, so she did it behind his back. She drank champagne. She sunbathed nude in the mountain meadows around the Berghof, despite Hitler's well-known public disapproval of female nudity and cosmetics. In 1939, with war about to break out, she took a shopping trip to Florence with her SS bodyguard in tow, and she watched films that ordinary Germans were legally barred from seeing. Hollywood imports were restricted throughout the Reich, but the Berghof's private cinema screened Gone with the Wind for her. She danced to swing records that, in any other German household, could have triggered a Gestapo visit. Now hold that image next to the propaganda. At the same moment Eva was sunbathing in silk and smoking imported cigarettes, the NS Frauenschaft was preaching to millions of German women that cosmetics were decadent, jazz was degenerate, foreign films corrupted the Aryan soul, and a true German woman wore simple wool and bore as many children as her body could carry. The Führer's own woman embodied every single vice the regime publicly condemned. Every one of them. And he didn't just tolerate it, he provided it. The shoes, the films, the champagne, the Florence trip. All of it came through him, paid out of his private funds or the party's coffers. And there is one more inversion here, the biggest one of all. It has to do with what she didn't produce. The Nazi cult of motherhood wasn't rhetorical. It was institutional, measured, and rewarded like a military honor. The Cross of Honor of the German Mother, the Mutterkreuz, was awarded to roughly 3 million German women between 1939 and 1944. Bronze for 4 children, silver for 6, gold for 8. It was the regime's domestic answer to the Iron Cross, and on Mother's Day 1939, the very first recipient in Germany was Magda Goebbels. Joseph Goebbels' wife, mother of 6, pinned with the gold medal while cameras rolled. The message could not have been louder. This was what a German woman was for. Count the children in Hitler's inner circle. Gerda Bormann had 10. Magda Goebbels had 6, plus a son from her first marriage. Margaret Speer had 6. Annelies Ribbentrop had 5. Lina Heydrich had 4. Almost every top Nazi wife qualified for the silver or gold Mutterkreuz. Eva Braun, by contrast, had 0. What she had instead were 2 Scottish terriers named Negus and Stasi, and even those were a quiet act of rebellion, a deliberate miniature counterpoint to Hitler's much photographed Alsatian blondie. The Führer had his propaganda dog. Eva had her 2 small ones. Nobody saw them, and that was the whole arrangement in a sentence. Hitler, meanwhile, was godfather to Edda Goering. He was godfather to Wolf Rüdiger Hess. He was godfather to Adolf Martin Bormann. He served as witness at the lavish 1935 wedding of Hermann and Emmy Goering, the ceremony that had aircraft flying over Berlin in formation. He signed the marriage register for Martin Bormann and Gerda in 1929. He attended christenings, weddings, and anniversaries across the entire top tier of the regime. He never attended anything for Eva. Not a birthday, not an anniversary, not a public dinner, nothing until the last 40 hours of both their lives. And the childlessness becomes almost unbearable when you see what happened 1 floor above her body on the day she died. We'll get there. The ideological wives weren't passive. They pushed. In January 1944, as Germany was losing the war, Gerda Bormann wrote her husband Martin a letter proposing a new law. She called it a Volksnottehe, an emergency marriage of the people. The idea was that worthy Aryan men should be permitted multiple wives, who would alternate pregnancies, so that, in her own chilling phrasing, Martin would always have a wife who was serviceable. Martin wrote back and told her the Führer thought exactly the same thing. In June 1943, Henrietta von Schirach confronted Hitler directly over the deportation of Jewish women from Amsterdam, which she had witnessed firsthand. Hitler snapped back that she was sentimental, that she had to learn to hate. She was banished from the Berghof for it, but she had pushed. Lina Heydrich wrote glowingly in her later memoir about the looted Czechoslovak estate her husband had been granted, an estate where she oversaw forced labour and, by multiple accounts, personally abused the prisoners working there. She described the whole arrangement as a fairy tale. Compare any of that to Eva Braun's one documented political statement. It comes in a letter she wrote to Hitler after the July 20th, 1944 assassination attempt. The entire political content of the letter is one sentence. She wrote that she lived only for his love, and that was all. No ideology, no policy, no pushing. The other wives were active engineers of Nazi thought inside their own homes. Eva was defined by a silence so complete that historians for decades assumed she simply didn't know. Recent scholarship has dismantled that assumption. She knew. She wasn't ignorant, just silent. And that silence was what made her useful to Hitler, in a way none of the fanatics ever could be. The final inversion plays out in the same building. on the same day. Berlin, the 1st of May, 1945. The Reich Chancellery is burning above ground. Soviet shells are landing within walking distance of the bunker complex. In the Vorbunker, one level up from the Führer bunker, where Hitler and Eva had died the previous afternoon, Magda Goebbels dressed her 6 children in white nightgowns: Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Holder, Hedda, Heider, every name beginning with H in tribute to Hitler. A doctor was asked to sedate them first with morphine. Then Magda herself, the first recipient of the Mother's Cross of Honour, the public face of Nazi motherhood, crushed cyanide capsules into each child's mouth, one at a time. She had written a farewell letter to her older son Harold, explaining that a world without National Socialism was not worth living in, and so she killed the 6 children the regime had demanded she produce. One floor below, Eva Braun was already dead. 33 years old, no children, a cyanide capsule bitten the previous afternoon, feet curled up on a small sofa beside the body of the man she had waited 16 years to marry. They had been husband and wife for about 40 hours. 2 women, 40 feet apart, one concrete floor between them, the same minute of the same day. And they embody the 2 opposite poles of Nazi womanhood with a clarity no historian could have invented. The propaganda mother killed the children the regime demanded she produce. The apolitical mistress died without producing any, and death wasn't even the last thing that separated them. What came after set them apart too. Because Eva died at 33, she never faced what every other surviving Nazi wife had to face. Emmy Goering went through denazification and was sentenced to a year in a labour camp. 30% of her remaining property was confiscated. She was banned from the stage for 5 years and spent the rest of her life in a small Munich apartment. Marga Himmler was initially classified as a follower, then reclassified Category 2, incriminated after evidence surfaced of her ideological commitment. She lost her pension and her voting rights. She lived under a false name until her death in 1967. Lina Heydrich fought the West German state for a widow's pension and won. Then wrote a memoir defending her husband that she pointedly titled as A Life Lived with a War Criminal. Ilse Hess opened a boarding house in the Alps and spent the rest of her life campaigning for Rudolf's release from Spandau prison. Their children became their own chapter. Gudrun Himmler, the daughter Heinrich Himmler adored, ran the Nazi aid network Stille Hilfe, Silent Help, for decades, until she died in 2018 at 88, still unrepentant. Edda Goering sued the Bavarian state for restitution of her father's seized property and continued defending him in interviews until her own death in that same year, 2018. Wolf Rudiger Hess campaigned publicly for his father's release until his own death in 2001. Eva faced none of it. No trial, no memoir, no apartment in Munich, no children to defend her legacy or repudiate it. Her sister Gretel had one daughter, Eva Barbara, who died by suicide in 1971 at just 26. After that, the direct line was gone. Where the other Nazi wives became the first generation of post-war perpetrators, the ones who defended, denied, and taught their children to defend and deny. Eva became a silence, a vacuum in the historical record, the one woman at the top of the regime who never had to answer for any of it because she chose not to survive it. Every contradiction in this story connects to one truth. Hitler sacralized motherhood in public and kept a childless mistress in private. He demanded visible loyalty from every German and hid his own woman for 16 years. He staged elaborate propaganda weddings for his paladins, stood godfather to their children, and signed their marriage registers and then married Eva Braun in a concrete bunker 40 hours before his death, with 2 shell-shocked witnesses and a civil registrar dragged in from a nearby Volkssturm unit. The historian Heike Gertemacher, whose 2010 biography reshaped how scholars read Eva, put it most sharply. Eva wasn't an embarrassing deviation from the Nazi ideal of womanhood. She was the private truth the regime spent 12 years telling ordinary German women was forbidden. The silk, the films, the champagne, the childlessness, the silence, the invisibility. That was what the Führer actually wanted for himself. Everything he demanded from his Volk was the exact opposite. Eva's cousin, Gertraud Weisker, who visited her at the Berghof in late 1944, left behind a single line that captures her better than any biographer has managed since. She said Eva was the unhappiest woman she had ever met. Her last recorded words were spoken to Hitler's secretary, Traudl Junge, minutes before she bit into the cyanide capsule. She told Junge to try to get out, that she might yet make her way through the Soviet lines. And she asked her to give Bavaria her love. In Hannah Arendt's sense of the word, Eva Braun was the banal opposite of every other Nazi wife. Not the fanatic, not the mother, not the propagandist, just the quiet woman in the mountain house who watched American films and waited 16 years for a man who was never going to love her the way she wanted. And that banality, that ordinariness sitting at the centre of the most extraordinary evil of the 20th century, is exactly what makes her case the most morally uncomfortable of them all. Thanks for watching History Hangover. If you found this video insightful, check out our other deep dives into the hidden lives at the heart of the Third Reich. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next upload.